Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm here, ready to unpack something, something pretty wild today.
And I'm Sunny. Hey. You know, it really feels like we've got something foundational to maybe fight about today.
You might be right. We're wading into the, let's say, the deep end of desire. It kind of suggests that maybe, just maybe, the wiring, how men and women think about romance, it could actually be different.
Oh, absolutely. But we're looking at it through psychology and, interestingly, modern literature, so it's kind of a new angle on it all.
Exactly. But definitely stick with us, because understanding these fantasies, I mean, what people really desire deep down versus what they say they desire, well, it might just unlock a lot about modern relationships.
And all that friction we seem to see everywhere these days.
Totally. So this is our Sip and Talk on dominance and devotion, the misaligned fantasies of men and women.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to give you, the listener, a kind of roadmap to help understand why these really deep gender fantasies often seem to clash, like directly contradict the public values we hold today, the progressive ones. And we're going to look at how those huge contradictions play out in, real-world power dynamics. That includes some pretty shocking and often ignored double standards when it comes to things like harassment and justice.
It's like a deep dive into that gap, isn't it, between feminist ideals on the surface and this subconscious yearning underneath. We're really going to try and unpack that chasm today.
Right. Provide the analysis, look at the data points that might explain why this gap exists and maybe why it matters for, pretty much every relationship you might have.
Okay, so let's kick things off with this huge cultural thing that's just exploded recently. This rise of what some people are calling the epidemic of female gooners.
Right, gooners. And for anyone who hasn't heard the term, it's basically slang for someone who's deeply obsessed with certain kinds of fiction, usually dark romance or erotica.
Yeah, smut, basically. And what's really striking here isn't just how much is being consumed, but who the preferred characters are.
Definitely. This genre, which is overwhelmingly read by women, often features, non-human characters. We're talking monsters, shifters, aliens, demons, beasts, you name it.
So the big question that jumps out when you look at this is, why the monsters? Why is that the fantasy?
And we've got, the perfect case study for this. It's a book that's it's a total literary anomaly. It's called Morning Glory Milking Farm.
Oh, yeah. The success of this book is just wild. Millions of sales, apparently. And something like nearly 20,000 five-star reviews on Amazon.
Amplified like crazy by that TikTok community, book talk. It's everywhere online. You kind of can't miss this genre if you spend any time there.
Right.
And the plot itself. Well, that's where you see this really fascinating mashup of socioeconomics and, primal fantasy.
Okay, break it down.
So the main character is Violet, and she's basically the ultimate modern millennial archetype, right? Mid-20s, has a degree, but...
Overeducated, underemployed.
Exactly. Completely drowning in debt, struggling to find any kind of security in this, late-stage capitalism we're in. She's like the definition of modern precarity.
Okay. Relatable for a lot of people, sadly.
Sure, totally. So Violet gets a job, and it's presented as this amazing opportunity, high pay, full benefits, stable work.
The catch. There's always a catch.
Right. The catch is she's working at this place, Kendrick Creek's Morning Glory Farm, and her job is to milk a minotaur.
Sorry, milk a minotaur.
Yeah, for semen, which is apparently used to create human male Viagra in the story.
Okay. Wow.
And the book even refers to these minotaurs as grade A certified prime beef, really emphasizing their raw physicality.
Good choice of words.
It really is. And the story is filled with these weirdly surreal details, almost funny in a dark way. The Minotaur's stable buddy is apparently a divorced cow.
A divorced cow, right?
Yeah. And the romantic scenes, they focus on things like the size and, quote, sliminess of the Minotaur's tongue during kisses.
Oh my God. Okay. It sounds completely absurd.
It is absurd. But it's tapping into something very real, some kind of deep-seated anxiety, it seems.
Right. Like you were saying, it's not just about kinky monster sex, is it? This fantasy seems to be about total radical financial security.
Exactly. Violet, who's crushed by the economic weight of modern life, the debt, the low wages, the constant hustle, she finds this complete liberation through a relationship with this, non-human entity.
So the Minotaur isn't just emotional security. He's removing the financial stress, the anxiety of just trying to survive.
That's the powerful undercurrent here. It offers a total escape from those pressures of late-stage capitalism. It's a surrender, but not just to a person. It's a surrender to economic certainty.
Like when he stops her from paying for dinner?
Yeah.
Saying he'll comfortably pamper her and spoil you?
Right. He says, end of story. He's literally taking over the burden of all the decision-making, all the financial stress. It's a complete transfer.
Okay, wait. You suggested this reading kind of undermines a Marxist critique, but let me push back on that a little. Isn't the fact that she gets this amazing job, high pay, full benefits, stuff that's incredibly scarce in the human world in the story, isn't that actually a really potent, almost dark critique of capitalism?
How so?
Like the author's showing that only this bizarre, non-human, primal setup can actually provide the security and benefits that modern society promises but constantly fails to deliver, especially to its educated but struggling population.
Huh. That's a really sharp point. Okay. It forces you to see the Minotaur not just as like a sex object, but maybe as a symbol of an alternative system, a return to some kind of transactional primal order where provision is just guaranteed.
It's like a hybrid fantasy.
That hybridization is absolutely key, yes.
Okay, so unpack that hybrid part more. Why does the protector have to be a monster? Why not just, a super rich, strong human guy?
Yeah.
A billionaire CEO type?
Well, the fantasy seems to require the protector figure to be overwhelmingly powerful, like inherently dangerous, capable of total dominance. That's the primal security part, the feeling of absolute safety because he can handle anything.
Okay, I get that.
But for the modern woman who values her independence and agency, that dominance absolutely must be tamed. It has to be devoted only to her.
Ah, so the monster represents the raw aggression, the strength needed for protection.
Right. While the whole taming aspect, his sort of domesticity and loyalty just to her, that makes it an ego trip, as some analysis puts it. She wants to be the special one, the only one who can turn that raw power into personalized, devoted protection.
So she gets the overwhelming strength, but without the risks you might get with a human partner, like him prioritizing his career or cheating or just leaving.
Pretty much. It's like safe violence or controllable chauvinism. She gets the security she craves, which is affirmed by his sheer, almost terrifying capability.
But she still holds the reins, ultimately. She keeps the power of choice.
Exactly. Now, let's pivot a bit to how society interacts with people consuming this stuff, because this is where we see a really massive social double standard emerge.
Yeah, I noticed this immediately looking into it. When guys consume erotic content, there's often this layer of shame, right? Using incognito mode, clearing browser history. There's this awareness of societal judgment about their preferences.
Totally. But conversely, women seem to consume this type of content, the monster smut, very openly.
Right. They display the books on Book Talk. They talk about them in detail. They go to these huge erotic conventions.
And the social narrative kind of gives them permission. It frames them as complex or sexually autonomous or evolved creatures who are just, exploring their depths.
It's like the ultimate social permission slip. Men get blamed or stigmatized for their private fantasies, but if you dare criticize a woman for, obsessing over a minotaur's slimy tongue or themes of submission.
Whoa, careful now.
You're immediately labeled a prude, right? Like you're stifling female autonomy or something.
It is a stark contrast in perception, and this open consumption has real cultural effects, too. We're seeing critiques, for instance, that Book Talk is actually, maybe degrading literary standards. The argument is that the value of a book is shifting. It's less about writing quality or character depth or plot, and more just about its spice level.
The quantity and extremity of the erotic content.
Exactly. And when desire gets commodified like that, it creates pressure to push boundaries further and further. You need more extreme stuff just to stand out in the market.
So the key takeaway here seems to be, the fantasy isn't just about a strong provider figure. It's about someone strong enough to handle everything, the debt, the chaos, the threats.
But crucially,
who's also totally submissive and devoted only to her, making her the absolute center of his powerful universe.
Precisely. It's a very specific and very demanding fantasy structure.
Okay, so this leads us right into that central paradox you mentioned earlier, this synergy between the feminist surface and the deep, almost chauvinistic structure of the actual fantasy being consumed.
Right. On the surface, you can absolutely see why it feels like a feminist win. Women are the ones doing the desiring, right? They have sexual autonomy.
They're actively choosing who or what they desire, whether it's a, clean-cut lawyer type or a minotaur.
Exactly. The argument is that sexual autonomy isn't a male monopoly anymore. Women are the desiring subjects, not just the objects of the male gaze.
Okay, that's the empowering surface narrative.
But then, if you peel back just one layer, you hit this deep, arguably chauvinist structure underneath. Because the choice of objects rarely just an average dude.
You're right. It's almost always an extremely hyper-masculine archetype.
The warrior, the beast, the mafia boss, the monster, this overwhelming force. And that choice reinforces the central importance of traditional male strength, dominance, and protection as the ultimate desirable qualities.
Huh. So the fantasy becomes this kind of intricate mental game. It's like repackaging traditional patriarchal ideas being protected, provided for, but framing it as romantic safety.
Pretty much. She chooses to be led, which reinforces the idea that male strength is central, but because she made the choice, it gets redefined as empowerment. It's like a controlled transaction where she sets the terms.
So this dynamic creates that safe violence or controllable chauvinism you talked about.
Exactly. The feminine desire for strong protection gets kind of co-opted by this very traditional aggressive masculine archetype. You want the beast.
But a beast who acts like a devoted puppy just for you.
Right. And the crucial bit is that her choice to be led, or to submit in the fantasy, is always presented as instant and revocable. She always retains the ultimate power to pull back, to dictate the terms, to say no.
Okay. But there's a potential downside to this, psychologically speaking. You mentioned a warning about neuroplasticity.
Yeah, this is where it gets a bit concerning from a clinical perspective. It's about the dark side of neuroplasticity.
Which is the brain's ability to change and rewire itself, right?
Exactly. And what's fascinating, and maybe a little scary, is how quickly the brain's pathways can be conditioned by intense pleasure signals. Like when someone reaches orgasm, the brain releases this massive flood of dopamine.
The reward chemical.
The ultimate reward signal. Yeah, it basically tells your brain, whatever you just did, do that again. It reinforces the behavior that led to the reward.
Okay. So what happens if your erotic imagination, your fantasy life, is constantly revolving around themes of, say, abuse or monster violence or non-consensual submission, or even slavery?
Well, you risk creating a really powerful operant conditioning loop in your brain. Meaning the brain, chasing that intense dopamine hit, starts prioritizing the neural pathways that link those extreme power dynamics like submission tied to violence with intense pleasure and satisfaction.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Over time, this could potentially neurologically reprogram your subconscious. You might start craving those dynamics in reality, or at least feel disappointed or unfulfilled when normal, healthy relationship dynamics don't provide that same level of extreme intensity.
It sounds almost like how addiction develops.
The mechanism is analogous, yes. Linking pleasure very strongly to something specific can create compulsive or addictive patterns. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of empowerment, arguably.
How so?
If you consistently link your deepest pleasure and sense of fulfillment to fantasies involving, say, slavery or abuse or total control, you're essentially training your brain to seek out something that is fundamentally unhealthy, maybe even dangerous, in the real world.
Which could be really detrimental to forming healthy relationships long term.
Exactly. And that potential conditioning, that blurring of lines, well, it leads us directly to this really shocking real-world example of what can happen when fantasy crashes into reality, when boundaries just completely disintegrate.
You're talking about the Sinners and Stardust incident.
That's the one. It was a dark romance convention, and things apparently got way out of hand. The lines between fictional desires and real-world consent just seemed to dissolve for some attendees.
What happened exactly?
Well, there was a man there, a performer or cosplayer, who was role-playing a popular dark romance character named Animus.
Okay. A typically dominant, maybe morally gray character, I'm guessing?
Precisely. And according to reports, he found himself being allegedly harassed and even assaulted by multiple female readers at the convention.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Assaulted?
The reports were really disturbing. They detailed some pretty extreme boundary violations. Women apparently ignored his very clear physical boundaries, touching his body without his permission.
Wow.
Cornering him physically to the point where he reportedly had a panic attack.
Oh my God.
And they kept pursuing him, aggressively demanding answers about like how his character would kidnap a woman. This was despite him repeatedly saying, "Hey, I'm playing a fictional character and you are violating my personal boundaries right now."
So they couldn't separate the fantasy from the real person?
Or they were unwilling to. The breakdown was apparently quite dramatic. They seemed completely fixated on the fictional archetype they desired, this dominant, aggressive captor figure, and were projecting it onto this real, non-consenting human being standing right there.
That's incredibly messed up.
It gets worse. The absolute most terrifying detail, the one that really shows the collapse of basic decency and boundaries, was that one female reader apparently used an AirTag.
A tracking device.
Yeah. To secretly track him, follow him all the way back to his hotel room after the event.
That's stalking. That's not fantasy, that's a crime.
It's aggressive, technologically aided pursuit, driven entirely by this fictional fantasy being superimposed onto a real person. It's deeply, deeply concerning.
Unbelievable.
And maybe the most stinging commentary on the whole situation came from a pretty unexpected source.
Oh.
The furries community.
Wait, the furries? People who dress up as anthropomorphic animals?
That community, according to the reports we looked at, they actually came out publicly and said something along the lines of, hey, even we have better respect for consent and bodily autonomy than what was displayed by some of these dark romance readers.
Wow. Okay, when the furry community is calling out your group's lack of respect for consent.
You know there's a serious problem, right?
Right.
It really underscores how that behavioral conditioning we talked about, linking intense desire to boundary-pushing themes, might have crossed a threshold for some people. It becomes a real social issue.
It highlights the danger of normalizing these extreme fantasies in public spaces without an equally strong shared understanding and commitment to real-world consent and boundaries.
Absolutely. The fantasy is one thing. Reality requires respect. #Tag3, the misaligned fantasies, and the gender double standard.
Okay, so we've established this really intense kind of contradictory nature of the dominant female fantasy that's emerged. Now let's pivot. Let's look at the common male fantasy counterpart and see how these two desires fundamentally seem to miss each other.
Right, and how that misalignment creates friction in relationships, but also leads to this huge asymmetry in how society judges these desires.
It's not just that men and women might want different things sometimes. It seems like both sides are seeking a very specific kind of power transfer in relationships. But when they seek that transfer, society judges them incredibly differently.
Exactly. Let's redefine that female goal again, just to be clear. It's often described as wanting to be led, but not controlled.
Right, selective submission. They're looking for that capable leader figure, the minotaur, the strong protector type, partly to hand over the burden of constant decision-making.
That decision fatigue we hear so much about, especially for women who might feel overworked, overstressed, constantly juggling mental loads. The fantasy is about a capable figure just taking the helm for a bit.
Letting go of that constant responsibility.
Right. They want that power transfer, that relief. But, and this is crucial, they absolutely must retain the right to veto, the right to dismiss the leader, to reclaim full autonomy instantly if that leadership feels like it's becoming unwanted control or, tyranny.
So they want to experience vulnerability, that kind of sweet relief of letting someone else be in charge.
Without actually giving up their fundamental power or agency.
Okay. And then on the male side, the fantasy seems to be almost the inverse of that, like protect but not dominate.
That's how some analysis frames it, yes. The idea is that the corresponding male fantasy often revolves around providing for and affirming a partner perceived as maybe cute and sweet, someone who is genuinely reliant to some extent on his strength and capability.
So his masculinity gets affirmed through his ability to provide and protect.
Exactly. He wants to be seen as the capable rock, the provider, the anchor. But, and here's the male paradox, they often desperately fear being accused of being overbearing or dominating or patriarchal for wanting that.
So they want their strength to be celebrated and needed.
But not weaponized against them, either by their partner or by society, labeling them as controlling just for wanting to provide.
Okay, I see the mismatch. And this is where that social judgment asymmetry you mentioned becomes really, toxic.
It really does. Think about it. When a woman talks about her fantasy maybe wanting to be led by a powerful figure, even a monstrous one, wanting to be spoiled and protected.
How is that generally received?
Often it's romanticized, it gets framed as complex and evolved. She's exploring her shadow side, she's embracing her depths, right?
Right. But then the man's corresponding desire to protect, to provide, to be that capable rock, but without demanding total control in return.
What happens when a guy expresses that desire, that need for his provision to be valued?
He often gets brutally mocked, especially online. He gets called soft or cringe or the dreaded simp.
Exactly. He's ridiculed for being too eager to please, paradoxically seen as too weak to lead because he desires appreciation for his support.
It's like a lose-lose situation for men in that dynamic.
It creates this really punishing social loop. If they try to lead assertively, leaning into that provider instinct, they risk being called patriarchal or controlling.
Okay.
But if they try to be more nurturing, supportive, affirming the woman's independence without asserting dominance, they get called weak, they get ridiculed, and they might fail to satisfy that underlying female desire for a formidable protector we talked about earlier.
Wow. That friction. It leads us straight into the double standard around harassment and justice, doesn't it? Which that Sinners and Stardust incident really threw into terrifyingly sharp focus.
It did. And the analysis we reviewed offered this really stark dialogue contrast, kind of illustrating the reality for many male victims.
Right. Let's walk through that. Imagine a guy describing an incident in public.
Okay. He says something like, "She touched me inappropriately. I clearly said no." And she just laughed, like, "You should feel lucky I even want to."
Okay. And the immediate social reaction around him, maybe from bystanders or even friends later, often it's dismissal, right? Laughter, minimizing.
Exactly. Things like, "Oh, come on, it was just a joke. Since when did men get so sensitive? She was probably just flirting."
Right. Now flip the genders. Imagine this scenario suggested by the second part of that dialogue.
The guy saying, "Funny, if I said, 'just kidding,' after touching a woman without her consent, I'd be on the news tomorrow. I'd be facing criminal charges instantly."
And that feels depressingly accurate, doesn't it?
Yeah. It highlights the core mechanism driving this asymmetry. It's the aggressive rationalization of female-on-male harassment.
It gets excused away.
Instantly, as just flirting. A silly joke, not serious. And why? Because of this persistent, culturally embedded idea that men are inherently physically stronger and therefore...
He can't really be threatened or harmed by it.
Precisely. The societal assumption acts like male strength is some kind of automatic, built-in anti-harassment shield.
Yeah.
Which is absurd, of course. Harassment is about power and violation, not just physical strength.
And sometimes women even use toxic lines to justify it, right? Like the example given, "What, are you Jay? Why don't you want it? Be a man."
Yeah, using traditional, frankly oppressive gender expectations against the man to excuse unacceptable behavior. It's a deeply problematic reverse gender policing.
So the clear outcome is male actions, especially aggressive or boundary-crossing ones, are treated immediately as a serious threat. That leads to quicker condemnation, easier prosecution.
While female actions, even when they involve things like stalking, as we saw, or unwanted physical contact, are often minimized, laughed off, rationalized away.
Which creates a huge gap in justice, potentially.
It does. Even if the legal system is written to be gender neutral in theory, in actual practice, both societal reactions and sometimes even judicial leanings, it often defaults to protecting the group seen as the historical structural victim, which usually means women.
So men's claims of being harassed or violated might get ignored, dismissed, or just not taken seriously.
And this isn't just anecdotal whining. There's data backing this up globally.
Really? Like what?
Well, reports consistently show that while the number of incidents where men are harassed by women is actually quite high, the rates of reporting those incidents are extremely low.
Why don't they report it?
In some Western countries, for example, studies found incidence rates of men being harassed were like 11% or even higher, but only around 2% actually reported it to the police.
Wow, that's a huge discrepancy.
And the reasons men give for not reporting: they anticipate the judgment, they assume they won't be believed, or worse, they'll be mocked, seen as failing to be man enough to just handle the violation.
That fear is probably compounded by that shame conditioning you mentioned earlier too, right? If they already feel shame about wanting devotion or needing protection, admitting they were victimized.
It probably feels doubly humiliating, amplifies the shame immensely.
So what's the answer? True equality has to mean judging the action, right? And its impact, regardless of who did it to whom.
Exactly. We need a system maybe focus more on restorative justice principles that actually analyzes the violation itself, the harm caused, not just the pre-existing gender roles or stereotypes of the people involved.
We have to get past this idea of just swapping privileges, where now maybe one group feels they can harass the other with relative impunity because of historical context. That's not progress.
No, it's just flipping the script, not fixing the underlying problem of boundary violations. And it's important to see this in a global context, too. Well, the idea of being led by a provider figure might land very differently in, say, more traditional Asian or Latin cultures, which often have stronger hierarchical family structures.
Compared to.
compared to, say, the extreme emphasis on independence you might find in Nordic cultures, or even in post-#MeToo Western societies where any hint of traditional dynamics can be suspect. Culture shapes how these fantasies are expressed and judged.
We always have to remember intersectionality, right?
Absolutely. A victim's vulnerability is rarely just about gender. A woman seeking a powerful supporter, like Violet in the book, might be driven by intense class pressures or debt, like we discussed.
And a male victim trying to get justice for harassment might face extra hurdles based on his race or his socioeconomic status, especially when dealing with a skeptical system.
True equality means dismantling all those biases, seeing the actual person and the actual harm, not just reacting based on stereotypes or group identities.
Okay, so the ultimate synthesis here, the big picture of this conflict. It seems like modern society grants women this incredible freedom to desire whatever they want. Right. But weirdly, the desires that seem to resonate most powerfully often echo these very old patriarchal structures, the strong, dominant, almost aggressive protector. And those desires get romanticized.
While simultaneously, men are getting judged harshly whether they try to embody that dominance or if they express the corresponding desire for devotion and appreciation for their provision. It's a setup for constant friction.
Yeah, it's a really complicated, messy reality that definitely challenges our progressive self-image, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
We've covered a lot here. The whole monster smut phenomenon, the warnings about neuroplasticity, that frankly terrifying convention incident, and these pervasive double standards in how we deal with boundaries and consent.
And it all seems to connect back to that fundamental tension. We're demanding radical independence and total freedom,
while maybe, subconsciously, still yearning for that primal, deep comfort of complete security and protection, whether that's financial security or physical safety.
That contradiction seems to be at the heart of it.
So maybe the question we should end on isn't about who's right or who's wrong in these different fantasy dynamics. Maybe the more profound question for you, the listener, to think about is this.
What are we all truly afraid of losing in our relationships today?
Is the driving fear really about losing control? Or is it actually, deep down, about losing connection?
That's definitely something to mull over. A provocative thought to leave things on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this pretty intense sip and talk. As always, we encourage objective analysis and, independent thought. Don't forget to subscribe to Sip and Talk.
Yeah, definitely subscribe. And hey, while you're at it, check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got great memes, liquor tasting videos, and all the latest European travel vlogs. Always fun stuff there.
Definitely check Mickey out.
Headed.
All right, that's it for us today.
We'll see you next time.